Everyone makes lists. The idea of writing things down so we don't forget, or so that we can check them off when they're done, or to simply stare us in the face until we finally do them, is a practice that goes back to ancient times. That's what Shaun Usher found out. Usher is the author of the book Letters of Note, a volume that looks at the written correspondence of many of the high and mighty, as well as people you've never heard of. In that book, Usher was trying to show us the importance of private correspondence, of how it could bring the broad themes and events of history down to a personal level, and how letters could give us insight into people we thought we knew. In the process of writing that book, Usher says he came upon another artifact that is also important and revealing.
And I was looking through all these archives and museum collections and dusty old books looking for these letters. And I kept finding lists written by the same people, even more so than letters. It seems that everyone, even to this day, letter writing's on the wane, as to be expected with the rise of the internet. But people still write lists, and people are just as infatuated with lists as they ever were, if not more so, because we seem to be busier and busier. And lists make all the chaos kind of manageable. You know, if you can break something down into a list, it's far easier to digest. It takes less time. So the busier we get, the more we seem to make lists and enjoy them.
Usher started collecting these lists, and they eventually became his book, Lists of Note, an eclectic collection deserving a wider audience. During his research on letters and lists, he says he noticed one basic and important difference between the two.
Letters are meant to be read by at least one other person. With lists, often they're meant to be very, very private, so they show you an even more intimate side to someone. And just being able to see, someone's preferences, the way they've made a list, the way they've numbered it or dotted it, it's just, there's so much to learn. And it just infatuated me just as much as letters.
Usher has lists from ancient Egypt to medieval times, to the 19th century, to today. Many of them are lists from popular culture, such as Walt Disney's list of potential names for the 7 dwarfs.
Obviously, it's taken from the Brothers Grimm tale, but the Brothers Grimm didn't name the dwarfs, so it came down to Disney to name them, and they came up with a list of 50 dwarfs, some of which are hilarious, but it's only because we're now so used to the dwarfs that were chosen, I suppose, that the other ones that weren't chosen seem so alien to us. But it's names like Big O Ego, Biggie Wiggy, Blabby, Crabby, Puffy, Nerdsy, Wistful, some incredible names. I love lists that show you an alternative universe, what could have been.
One of those lists is from the film Gone with the Wind, and it deals with that famous line Rhett Butler utters at the end of the movie.
There's another list about what is now the most famous line in movie history, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And at the time, this was obviously decades ago, the MPAA, the censors, deemed that the word damn was too offensive. So the producers of the film had to come up with a list of alternatives to the line, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And some of them are terrible. Thank God that the MPAA relented in the end and let damn be used. There's lines like, frankly, my dear, I don't care. Frankly, my dear, it leaves me cold. But when you get to the bottom, it's things like, frankly, my dear, I've withdrawn from the battle. Frankly, my dear, the whole thing is a stench in my nostrils. Frankly, my dear, it makes my gorge rise. Can you imagine if any of these have been chosen?
Authors are big list makers. In the book, Usher has a couple of lists by Charles Dickens that show his sense of humor and creativity.
He moved into his new house, Gaverstock, and he had a load of empty shelf space. I mean, he must have had a lot of shelves if he had empty shelf space. And he decided to fill that space with fake books. So he made up all these fake book names and wrote to a bookbinder and said, could you make up these fake book covers? And I'm going to have them on my bookshelf. Some of them are really, really quite funny. There's things like Captain Parry's Virtues of Cold Tar, Jonah's Account of the Whale, Orson's Art of Etiquette, Growler's Theology with Appendix 4 volumes, King Henry VIII's Evidences of Christianity 5 volumes, Morrison's Pills Progress 2 volumes. It's fantastic.
Lists are universal, and even ancient populations made them for everyday things. From around 1250 BC, there's a listing of excuses that Egyptian laborers gave for not showing up to work, including wrapping the corpse of his mother, the scorpion bit him, and brewing beer. Later in history, we see some very famous people that you wouldn't think would bother with the day-to-day triviality of making up lists.
Leonardo da Vinci, this was a shopping list he wrote. It's a very short shopping list, and he wrote it and accompanied it with illustrations of all the food, so that, there's a picture of a piece of bread, for example. But it's thought that his assistant, who did the shopping for him, was illiterate and couldn't read, so Leonardo would draw a little picture so he could understand it. But it's just an incredible thing to see something so everyday attributed to someone who we think, quite rightly, see as someone so clever and important. There's also Galileo. He wrote a shopping list once, and it was all the parts with which he made his groundbreaking telescope to make the lenses, things like ball bearings, and he went shopping and bought all these parts and then changed the world by making this functioning telescope.
Some of the lists are very sad, such as the one Civil War nurse Clara Barton drew up of missing men.
So Clara Barton, who started the Red Cross in the US, but before she did that, she was searching for loved ones, soldiers who died in the war or who'd gone missing in the war. And every week in the newspapers in the US, there was this enormous list of missing persons printed in all the papers, and it was absolutely enormous. So I've kind of reprinted just one double page of this amazing list, and it's just these names of people, many of which were never found. It's just looking at it so vast. It says roll of missing men at the top, and there's a little letter from Clara Barton. Really quite tragic, and it's sad to think that the majority of these were probably never reunited with their families.
Making up lists of 10 commandments seems to be popular, and Usher said he could fill another book of just those kinds of lists. One notorious fraudster, Victor Lustig, composed a list of 10 things the aspiring con man needed to master to be a success.
The interesting thing is a lot of these rules could be kind of used by other people, not just con men. Be a patient listener. It is this, not fast talking, that gets a con man his coups. Never look bored. Wait for the other person to reveal any political opinions, then agree with them. Let the other person reveal religious views, then have the same ones. Hint at sex talk, but don't follow it up unless the other fellow shows a strong interest. Never discuss illness unless some special concern is shown. Never pry into a person's personal circumstances. They'll tell you all eventually. Never boast. Just let your importance be quietly obvious. Never be untidy. Never get drunk. They make perfect sense. They're all great rules for a con man, but they could also be applied elsewhere.
If lists are universal, then Usher should have a few of his own. None appear in the book, and he says there's a good reason for that.
My lists at the minute, well, because I'm always researching books and trying to find lists and letters, I've got lists of lists. I've got spreadsheets. I can't live without spreadsheets. I've got spreadsheets in which other spreadsheets are detailed. I'm drowning in spreadsheets. My wife, she can't get up in the morning without making a list. She functions purely via lists. But mine would never make a book. They're very boring, but they're very functional.
You can read the fascinating lists of famous, notorious, and lesser-known figures from history in Shaun Usher's 2014 book, Lists of Note. To learn more about all of our guests, head to viewpointsradio.org. This segment originally aired in October 2018 and was written by Evan Rook and Pat Reuter. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our lead producer is Libby Foster. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.